Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 860, and I will continue with Graham Priest's wonderful paper, What's So Bad About Contradictions. Main reason for my perseverance with this is underlying all scholarly academical work whatsoever, wherever you are, and it needs to be looked upon a little bit more carefully because it is more complicated than people usually think it is. Let's have a look, see here. Let's jump to the fourth one. That's a good one. If contradictions were acceptable, people could never be rationally criticized. And I think this is maybe the most pertinent one in academic works. It's always about rational criticism. And the idea that founds the whole thing, or the unthought logic, so to speak, is always that contradictions cannot be acceptable. I will show today that this is untrue and it leads to disaster to believe such. The fourth objection, Graham Priest writes, concerns rationality and is to the effect that contradictions were acceptable. No one could be rationally criticized for views that they hold. The thought here is that you hold some view and I object to it. There is nothing rationally to stop you maintaining both your original view and my objection. So somebody's saying something and I say something to contradice that. I can have the both views at the same time because I allow two opposing arguments, contradictions. And I think everyone in the academic world agrees on that. And that is dangerous thinking. Why is that? Well, the most obvious failing of this argument is that it makes the familiar and illicit slide from some to all. The mere fact that some contradictions are rationally acceptable does not entail that all are. The charge you accept some contradictions to be true, so why shouldn't you believe any contradiction to be so? Is as silly as the charge you believe something to be true, so why shouldn't you believe anything to be so? Well, that's a good point, I'd say. It might be argued that if it is logically possible for any contradiction to be true, as it is in the semantics we looked at in reply to objection 1, the last lecture, then all contradictions are rationally acceptable. This, though, most certainly does not follow either. The fact that something is a logical possibility does not entail that it is rational to believe it. It is logically possible that I am a fried egg, though believing that I am is ground for certifiable insanity. As we saw in the reply to the last objection, there is a lot more to rationality than consistency. Well, I would say what is at stake here is this massive oversimplification of what is rational to actually bottom in what people think is logic. And logic comes for people as a savior, a sort of a thought up rule that will save them from having to defend views themselves, having to entertain intellectual endeavors, having to learn, and so forth. Well, logic doesn't serve that purpose. Logic does have a purpose, but is not in the bottom of rationality, as a huge oversimplification, and it destroys both rationality and logic. Well, here is the worst thing: it destroys rationality. And Graham writes in another paper, this is the reason for the fall of intellectualism in the West. This is why it's gone downhill. We don't have an equality factor, and we let something that is a rule be some sort of rule that's outside ourselves and that could control rationality, and therefore you don't have to be worried or have responsibility. Something like that in that ballpark. Yeah, that is just the fact. Just because something is a logical possibility, it doesn't entail that it's rational to believe it. It's completely rational that I'm a fried egg, as some say. A person's view, this is another thing, may be rational criticized if they can be shown to entail something that is rationally unacceptable. This might be a contradiction, but it might be some non-contradiction. Some non-contradictions, for instance, that I'm a fried egg, are in fact better than some contradictions, e.g. that the liar sentence is both true and false. In the last sentence, what is rationally acceptable and what is not is likely to be a holistic matter, to be determined by the sort of criteria I discuss in response to the last objection. Once more, the last lecture. Let me illustrate again. I argue that there is an inconsistent account on truth, which endorses the T-scheme, was preferable to the numerous consistent accounts available. Suppose that it turned out in defending the inconsistency view that it had to be shored up in the same methodology, unsatisfactory ways as extant consistent accounts, e.g. to avoid strengthened paradoxes until it was just as complex and contrived. It would then cease to be rational to accept it. The fact that one can accept some contradictions would do nothing to help the matter. Well, I think this is a perfectly adequate reply to the objection, but let me say a little more. Graham Priest continues. I am frequently asked for criterion as to when contradictions are acceptable and when they are not. It would be nice if there were a substantial answer to this question, or even if one could give a partial answer in the form of some algorithm to demonstrate that an area of this discourse is contradiction-free. Who asked that question? Just dumbfounded. But I doubt that it is possible. Nor is this a matter for surprise. Few would now seriously suppose that one can give an algorithm or any other informative criterion to determine when it's rational to accept something. There is no reason why the fact that something has a certain syntactic form, be it P and non-P or anything else, should change this. One can determine the acceptability of any given contradiction, as of anything else, only on its individual merits. What's he saying in short? It's let's go back to how rationality used to be. This is how I interpret it. And let's skip the idea that it could be an automatic logic system that controls what is logical, or I would rather say rational, sane, intellectual, sustainable, to use a more modern phrase. But once more, we are passive in the Western world, and we make do with rules that we think applies also for rationality. I start thinking, what could be the reason for that? Even if it were to work, why would anyone want to give up one's own rationality? What is the cause of this idea? The most important possession in hand of a human being is that human being's thinking process. If that's going to be given up, I would say everything that is human about that person is gone. And it's a defeatful attitude. If there any time were a defeatful attitude, it can't be any more self-defeating. It's like giving up everything that has any worth, meaning, or standard, and be happy with nothing. Indeed, this is the closing of the Western mind. I was just finishing off a lecture series, a class held at the Gothenburg University, and the person in charge of it was constantly relying on logical rules instead of his own manner of thinking. And he sort of pointed to them, and the idea was one was supposed to just accept them just as he did. It doesn't work that way. No, I don't think it even would be nice. Once again, I would say this is possibly this ludicrous idea that the world is smaller than logic. So the world is this size and logic is this big size. It could sort of capture the whole world and everything that's happening inside that world. And this also entails that there is no subject, no me, no ego, no participator. This is widely interesting, and I think this would never be interesting if it weren't for the mirror. Let's take number 5 also, once we're at it. Once we are still in the through. Objection number 5. If contradictions were acceptable, no one could deny anything. And this is a discussion I had with a neighbor of Sune, actually, Lars, when he realized that he got shocked. Well, he realized that the objection didn't hold. It is actually true that contradictions are acceptable. Well, the final objections take us into a new territory, one concerning public speech. The argument here is to the effect that if contradictions were acceptable, then no one would have any way of denying anything. Whenever they asserted negative I, this would not show that they rejected I, for they might accept both I and non-I. To discuss this argument, we first need to be clear about asserting and denying. These are speech acts, like questioning or commanding. Which ones? If I assert something A, then this is a speech act whose intention is to get the hearer to believe A, or at least believe that I believe A, with whatever Grecian sophistication one may wish to add. If I deny something, on the other hand, A, then this is a speech act whose intention is to get the hearer to reject all A, cast it out from their beliefs and or refuse to accept it. Or at least to get the listener to believe that I reject it, which whatever Grecian sophistication one may wish to add. No prima facie, at least assertion and denial are quite distinct kinds of speech act. And this is the way they have often been understood traditionally, e.g. in the Port Royal logic, though of course the point was not to put in terms of speech act, which is a modern invention. When we say modern invention, we should say Austin. But Frege suggested that many now accept that denial may be reduced to the assertion by the equation. Denial is the same as assertion of negation. This identity is incorrect. To assert a negation of something is not necessarily to deny it. When I, for example, assert a negation of the liar sentence, I am not denying it. After I accept it, and I intend you to do the same. Nor does this really have anything to do with dialectism. We all of us discover sometimes, maybe by prompting of some Socratic questioner, that our beliefs are inconsistent. We assert A and then a little later assert no A or not A. We may well wish to revise our views in the light of this. We usually do as well. But that is not the point here. The point is simply that in asserting non-A, we are not denying A. We do accept A, and that after all is the problem. Hence, to assert a negation is not necessarily to deny. And the problem that this objection points to is just as much a problem for the classical logician as the dialectist. More importantly, and conversely, one can deny something without asserting a negation. That's very important. One can use a certain tone of voice or body language, like thumping the table. The issue is simply one how to convey one's intentions. This is the solution to the problem. In fact, one can often deny something by asserting its negation. Thus, this objection again makes the now very familiar slide from some to all. Whether or not one is denying just depends. This raises the question of how one knows whether someone who utters a negative sentence is asserting or denying. You hear? This is very similar to linguistics and also the question from literary science about monosemism. In linguistics is called that one word can only have one intention, or two or three, but they have to be always definable by context or the intention of the hearer or talker. See, it's the same tendency. I'm talking about logic. Yes, of course, that's the underlying subject of all academic work. Even this is a formal proposition I make today. This logic, trust me, is underlying all discourse. Criticism, assertiveness, long debates are all depending on this. And except the most prominent, the most intelligent, they think you have to follow these unspoken laws or what they are. But it's not clear how you follow them. You just feel you follow them. And when you get slapped over the face by the one you are criticizing, you will realize that the other person won't follow the rules you thought you were following. I think that's the main problem that shocks me it's impossible. It would always be impossible to follow these rules because they don't exist. There's no force in the universe that says, for instance, the excluded middle should be so. We just think it is so. So there you go. The most limiting things are not even written laws, and they're not even physical laws. They are the unspoken laws, the laws no one mentions and everyone intends to follow. And that's the very reason Derrida was so criticized, which was quite amazing. That's the only time so many people, 4 chairmen, objects to the well-deserved honor of receiving this gratification from Cambridge. 4 people. This is at the bottom, and it still is today. I would say even more so in Sweden than in England. I was myself denied of writing anything about Derrida. And you have the ambiguity of denial. And that's between the content of a negative sentence and the act of denial. And that's a major problem. How do you tell if somebody is negating something ironically? There's no laws against that as well. Or in a deconstructive manner, or with a malintended idea, or why not how Paul de Man did. He, in a certain aspect, it logically looked like he was following the Nazis, but he undermined them by being too exaggerated and took away the force of the whole thing. Well, it seems that we can't get rid of human intention. We try, and we mostly try to get rid of human intention within ourselves. And then we let this rage fall upon others and demand them to do the same torturous thing, just because nobody ever made these laws or rules. They have, of course, been verbalized and put in print. And the thing is to really let this sink in. Turn the tables and say that I'm trying to assert that the president of Russia is an alien. And I can read up an argument and they're all logical. They don't contain any contradiction whatsoever. And according to logic, that would prove me to be at least potentially right, even though the actual saying is completely outrageous. We allow for any proposition by accepting this passive automatic law. And the passivity in this law reminds me of the passivity of linear time. It just happens. Don't blame me, I'm not involved in this. That's a little bit how it feels like. You are no longer involved in your own thinking. And I would say this is the equivalent of linear time, homogeneous space. This is the intellectual homogeneity, the giving up of being active in thinking and letting knowledge be your own. And there is nothing to be lost to give up the ideas of that these laws exist. They've never been spoken, but they need to be uncovered, need to understand the working principle underlying the whole thing. and then they would just dissolve. And then you will be free to argue exactly as you need in that specific moment. If you follow this transcendental laws, or invisible laws, I would call them, no one else can see that you follow these laws, and it will only handicap what you are thinking, writing and saying. So you just lose. There is nothing to lose when you give up these laws. And there is a lot to win. More flexibility, and I would say more direction as well. And you will not, if you examine an argument, if you have a political debate, you criticizing somebody in your area of knowledge or some other area, you will not be able to really dwell into what you feel to be wrong in the text, the saying or the doing. You will be handicapped by the laws and actually come out as criticizing something completely else. Because these laws cannot be consistently obeyed by everyone. So these 4 people that denied Derrida his well-deserved honor of having this reward in the early 70s, they were not in agreement and they didn't even know it. We have all our perspectives here and we have all our takes on this law because it cannot be formulated. How in God's name can it be followed? So isn't it odd? It seems that we've given up rules of society, how to treat other human beings, courtesy, even morale, and we've given that up in favor of laws that are not even pronounced and nobody knows what they are about. But sure as hell they can be uncovered and discovered for what they are. They are just thin air disappearing into nothing. And what you find yourself to be is absolutely free of them. And you're free as to do the logical arguments as you prefer to strengthen whatever you want to say. Or understand something to the utmost, because it also blocks understanding. I think that's enough for today, and I think that could actually be the last of Graham Priest for now. But it does help to look for different approaches to understand the mirror image more and more. And I would say this text would have been too difficult for me before. I know that for a fact because it's been in my archive for at least 2 years. Well, I say thank you very much and I wish you a very pleasant night. Sleep tight.